Iran turned into an absolute monarchy. And, you know, the Shah was not the worst tyrant the world has ever seen. He really wasn't much of a tyrant. He did throw people in prison for political, dissidents. He was not, he did not believe in free speech. Most countries on the planet don't believe in free speech. As like if I were going to put him on a scale of, 0 being you're completely benign and 6 you're completely evil, he's probably a 2 or a 3. He was not the worst leader the world has ever seen. In any case, in 1979, the Iranian people decided they wanted more freedom. They wanted to go back to their previous 2 attempts at democratization. They took to the streets and toppled his government and then stuck themselves with the Islamic Republic, which is a completely repressive and violent state. I would put them 5.5 on my 7-point scale. So, maybe not the worst regime the world has ever seen, but definitely not the best either. So the tragic irony is that U.S. interference in 1953 put Iran on this course that then ended up just messing the Iranian people up, mostly of their own doing, right? Like, I don't want to blame the United States only. The Iranian people stuck themselves in this position, but there's a feedback loop, and the two are totally related.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I disagree a bit with that, but that's fine. Obviously, we're here to hear different ideas and opinions. So, coming back to Iran now.
Why do you disagree with that?
Well, because I know you're saying it's like the current government is very repressive and basically presenting them as much worse than the monarchy. I think the issue you've got right now is things with Iran are very complex. I think a lot of times Westerners look at foreign nations that aren't theirs in a manner that they basically superimpose their own ideology onto other ideologies. And it's not to say that one ideology is better than the other. I'm not somebody who believes in theocracies. But that being said, there is no evidence that suggests that a theocracy is any worse than a democracy, which isn't any worse than a monarchy, which isn't any worse than a republic. Because we've seen...
I totally disagree with that, obviously. I think theocracies are the worst governments ever. So, like, not just Afghanistan and Iran, but the United States and Israel. I just can't stand any of them. They're all terrible.
Well, the United States, as an example, is meant to be a republic, and Israel's meant to be a democracy. Sorry?
That died. The United States Republic is in the garbage bin. It's totally a theocracy on the path to becoming Gilead. Like, that's the right-wing fundamentalist Christian wet dream, and they're making it happen.
Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah. So you can go state by state, but most of the southern states have been taken over by these fundamentalist Christians. Their goal is to completely destroy. What was that?
Do you mean Christian Zionists?
No, I mean fundamentalist Christians. Okay. I mean the Christian version of the Taliban.
Okay.
So, like Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, his cadre, the people who support him, are the Christian version of what we have in Afghanistan. There's the difference between them is they don't believe in the Prophet Muhammad. Otherwise, they are on the same page. They're against women's rights. They want to shut down freedom of speech. They want to destroy the universities. They want to cripple the education system. They want to take away women's right to vote. Like, they are on the path of trying to make this happen. That is their goal. I guess there's an added feature. They're also old-fashioned Southern racists, and they can't stand anybody who isn't white. In fact, they can't stand anybody who isn't Christian. So they're an intolerant group of racist Christian fundamentalists who have merged nationalism with religion and are trying to create a theocracy, and they're succeeding. The United States has been on a path towards theocracy now for a few decades. It's gone into hyperdrive under Trump.
Okay. And so what you believe is that, according to your opinion, the United States of America, which was initially a republic, a country that was basically created by white Anglo-Saxon Christian zealots, was a republic, but then is now moving towards a theocracy because of Christian zealots. Is that the position you've got?
What's interesting is most of the founding fathers actually weren't even Christian. George Washington was a Methodist. James Madison was a Methodist. There were definitely Methodists in the mix. James Madison, of course, was the chief architect of the United States. So there definitely was a very strong Christian presence. But, you know, like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson weren't Christian. Jefferson was a deist. John Adams was a Unitarian. We don't know what Benjamin Franklin was. I think he was a Franklinist. He believed that he was his own deity and he worshipped himself. But so their goal was to create a secular state. And they did. They created a secular state. The problem is that the rhetoric of the United States in the Cold War was that the United States was the Christian country and the Soviet Union was the atheist country, and that communism was atheism. And that mantra stuck. And so after the 60s, there was this pendulum swing where a bunch of people who had been, you know, atheists or agnostics who had sort of were part of the secular society that wanted to modernize it. They were part of the 60s uprisings. They pushed back against war and they pushed for civil rights. They actually ended up swinging over and becoming Christian fundamentalists. That's one of the problems with society, right? Is that there's this pendulum swing where humans overcompensate. People see the stock market going up and they start buying, and then they create a bubble and then it implodes, and then they panic sell and they crash the thing, and both were wrong. And that's exactly how we behave when we do politics. We go from one extreme to the other, and in the process, of course, cause enormous harm to ourselves. And so that's what the United States is actively doing to itself right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with some elements of what you said. I didn't expect us to be like disagreeing, but that being, and I'm trying to be as respectful as possible. I don't really normally when I disagree
don't respect
people,
me. I'm an idiot, just like everybody else.
I want I need I show people respect because you've been very respectful. But I can be harsh at times, so I'm gonna try my best to. But look,
be harsh. I'm not fragile.
I'll get in trouble with my mum. So coming back to it, look, there's some elements I agree with and some elements I don't. I think there's two key components. So the first thing is I agree with you wholeheartedly that when it comes to the founding fathers of the United States of America, many of them had distinct opinions, and some of them were Unitarian, as an example, maybe even, as you said, deists, which kind of is a confusing ideology that may fit in with Islam, may fit in with Judaism, but probably less so fits in with Christianity. That being said, when you look at the actual creation of the United States of America, if you look at it, a lot of them were overarchingly fundamental Christians. I mean, if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, they had a boat, for example, called the Jesus, because there was this kind of Christian element within it. And so that's one element where I was trying to say it was a Christian society. But I guess the second more important element is when I mentioned that not one mechanism is any better than the other. I think you yourself have stated that actually with the United States of America, the fact that it was a republic, and I can give many democracies, you mentioned Israel, the United Kingdom, various other democracies, there are major perils with it, which it can be upended, it can be commandeered, it can be controlled and taken into a different direction. You mentioned that the United States of America has changed from a republic to theocracy. We've got democracies such as in the UK, in Europe, in the United States of America, which in my view have been commandeered by a foreign nation. And so what is a country but its sovereignty? And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is I think about, like, you know, systems a lot, political systems quite a bit. And I just see the flaws in every single one of them. I don't think there's one that is better than the other. You look at this secular democratic society that we've got, and we're seeing in real time many of the problems that are inherent with it, within the destruction of the society, the destruction of the family, destruction of a wide range of things. And so I say that to make this point that, yes, you may disagree with the theocracy. I actually don't think a theocracy is the best, although I'm a very religious Muslim. I don't think actually theocracy is the best form of governance, that because of the way, again, it can be implemented in a kind of more harsh manner or an incorrect manner. So even though I believe that Islam is right, and actually if there was a legal system that was really based on Islam, it would be brilliant. But then I know that if someone was to implement that, they'd probably implement a version which is a lot harsher than what I agree with. So the point I'm trying to make with all of this kind of fluff is that I don't agree that there is one system that's better than the other. I don't see that how a theocracy is inherently worse than the other. You can actually have a theocracy that I believe, let's say, for example, it was a country I was creating based on the values that I believe in the Quran. I would be like, wow, this theocracy, which is based on what I believe is right, is pretty relaxing. Everyone's living themselves. Everyone's enjoying this peace, harmony, and love. But then there may be a theocracy that's created by maybe Salafists, and I'll be like, I don't want to live in that because I might just get in trouble. So I think it's just like this. It's not that one system is worse, but there's actually inherently problematic issues with all systems. But sorry, go ahead. Give what's your thoughts.
So when it comes to like the difference between, having a democracy, a republic, or a monarchy, I would agree. That at the end of the day, what really matters is that you have quality leadership, not how did you get to that quality leadership. So if you have an educated population, then having a democracy or a republic really works well because they're going to make intelligent choices. If you don't have an educated population, you're probably better off with the monarchy because in that case, the monarch can steer the ship. But even if you have an intelligent population, a monarchy might also work great. Like it doesn't, what matters really is what kind of leadership did you end up with in the end? Having said that, the reason that I'm against theocracy for many reasons. One of them is the history of theocracies is that they're violent. There has never been a theocracy that was benign. And the reason is because once the state says this is what your religion is, there's no room for change. There's no room for fixing it. There's no room for you to express yourself in a different way. And the Islamic Republic is the classic example of that. In the late 1990s, the Iranian people, because the Islamic Republic actually had free and fair elections for a while. It was actually the potential for it to turn out differently than it did was really there. And in the late 90s, they had a free and fair election, and they elected a guy named Khatami. I think it was 1997 when he took office. And Khatami, people, I think, forget this or don't know this about the Iranian system. The supreme leader is the guy in charge. His name is the supreme leader for a reason. The president is a figurehead. So it's the UK flipped, right? Where the king has the power and the prime minister is a figurehead. In the Islamic Republic then, Khatami said, look, I want to make all these changes. I want to reform the state. I want to make it so that the state isn't telling you how to believe. I want to ease things back. And then he said, but you, the people, have to make this happen because I'm a figurehead. I don't have any real authority. And the Iranian people put in the elbow work and the grease and the hard work to get the kind of reforms through that they were trying to do. And, I was very hopeful during the Khatami years. And then, of course, George Bush Jr. happened, and he completely derailed the system by doing his stupid axis of evil speech at the 2002 State of the Union. The reason why that was so catastrophic was when 9/11 happened, Khatami issued an official statement from the Islamic Republic, and it was that the Islamic Republic stands against all forms of terrorism. And it said, we stand with the American people and we are willing to help the American people any way we can. Now, the United States and Iran had been in secret negotiations to normalize relations since Khatami's presidency had started. At one point, a group of Iranian officials had met US officials in Houston, Texas. Like they were really trying to make this work. And one of the things the U.S. basically said was, let us sell our products in Iran. Let us bring Coca-Cola back. That's a huge issue for us. And the Iranians were like, sure. Khatami apologized for the Iran hostage crisis. Like there had been all these steps taken by the Islamic Republic to try and normalize relations. 9/11 happens. The Islamic Republic goes all in. Khatami says, we are here to help. The United States said, we're going to destroy the Taliban. You're your enemy. You've been funding the Northern Alliance. You hate them as much as we do. Iran had actually mobilized its military 2 times in the 90s, sent it to the Afghan border, and were debating actually invading. So the United States comes along and says, enemy of an enemy is a friend. Maybe we can work together. You give us the contact information for the Northern Alliance. We'll use those as the ground troops, and we'll be their air support, and we'll take out the Taliban. And the Iranians couldn't wait to hand that information over to Bush. And then the next thing you know, just 4 months later, he's saying there's an axis of evil that goes from North Korea through Iran to Iraq. And the Iranian hardliners went, see, that's what happens when you work with the great Satan. And that kind of bumbling idiot diplomacy, or it was on purpose, it's hard to say, then pushed Iran in the direction that it has gone since 2002, which has been really harsh and really repressive. And it has turned out to be a disaster for the Iranian people. So, of course, the U.S. sanctions make it worse, right? Because it's entirely possible that if the U.S. didn't do the sanctions, that Iran would start to liberalize. And liberalize, I don't mean become like Western. I just mean ease away from some of its harsher, more repressive tendencies, because that's what tends to happen, right? There are three things that make a state sovereign: revenue, legitimacy, and violence. And if you don't have revenue and you don't have legitimacy, violence is your best bet. And so by taking away Iran's economic abilities, and when you consider that a huge portion of the Iranian government Iranian population want reforms, it undermines their legitimacy as well. So that's why they've become so violent.
Yeah. So look, I guess just to go through what you're saying. So if you look at the Iranian system, you're quite right. You have the supreme leader who is overarchingly in charge. He kind of has the parameters of what his expectations are. You can't go beyond those parameters. That being said, when they anoint a president has some kind of movement in what he's able to do. And you quite rightly highlighted Khatami and his ability to negotiate with the United States of America. The fact that they were always very open to make agreements with the United States of America, to the extent that they even apologized, which you also said quite accurately. In addition to that, if you look at it recently, since the election of the new reformist leader, Pezeshkian, you've also had quite a bit of liberalization in the country, and it has been significant. Women, which is something the West care about a lot, have been basically, dressing a lot more, less modestly, and various other things have happened in the country. So that shows that there is this kind of leeway when it comes to kind of this liberalization that can occur within the country. Not that I'm saying that that's always the best thing, because there's obviously pros and cons to these things. But coming back to it, what it demonstrates is that actually Iran was willing to negotiate with the United States of America. They were willing to have an agreement with the United States of America. They were willing to put American companies and organizations into Iran. And the only problem that there was this random speech, which I don't believe was random. It was quite clearly choreographed, orchestrated by Israel, because the aim was always to destroy the entirety of the Middle East and go after Iran later. They couldn't have a strong Iran, because later that would be a problem to take them out. And if you look at what's happened with Iran, there's no doubt about it. There's no country in the world, whether you mention Cuba, whether you mention Venezuela, any of these countries that can't survive based on sanctions. Sanctions aren't an addition to an issue. They are the fundamental problem, because once you remove a country's ability to trade, and as you said, that they were always really willing to want to trade with the United States of America, that's when you take away their ability to function properly. And as you know better than anyone, that sanctions are something that cripple the most poorest of people. For me, it's one of the most worst humanitarian crimes that you can apply to any people. And the only reason it was done to them wasn't because they were a theocracy. It wasn't even that they were not willing to agree to trade with the United States of America. It was solely based on the fact that Israel did not want them to become strong, because Iranian oil, as per your very important and elaborate explanation at the start, is one of the most sought after oils. It is very thin. It is very easy. It's very easy to refine. It would be a powerhouse in the Middle East. It would be a powerhouse in the world. And so when they applied these sanctions on the most poorest of people to take them and make them starve even more, in the hopes that that starvation will cause a rebellion. It wasn't based on living in a theocracy or living in a harsh society or living in a very extreme rule-based society. I mean, you have protests in Iran. You're not allowed to protest in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Dubai, Qatar. I saw pro-Palestinian protests in Iran, but not in those countries. I saw economic protests in Iran while there was an attempted coup by Mossad and the CIA, but not in these Gulf states. And yet it's based on sanctions that these people are starving. I just think about the human rights crimes that have occurred due to that, where the aim is, it's not the rich who suffer, it's probably not even the government who suffers, it's the most poorest of people, and the aim is to cause a color revolution. And so I would say the sanctions are the major issue and the major problem that's occurred. They've done it with the Venezuelans, and I speak to the Venezuelans who also speak very negatively about Maduro, but actually it's because of the sanctions that they've caused that psychology and sociology to occur. You look at Cuba, and they've done the exact same things. And so this human rights violation that's occurred by the foreign nations in order to harm the people, in order to cause a color revolution, I think is the major issue. And then obviously within the country, if there's certain cultural issues, which, as you said, swing. If I look at the United States of America, it was a very liberalized country just 4 or 8 years ago. Everyone was getting banned just based on having a disagreement on those liberal values, whether it was liberal values, whether it was woke ideology, whether it was COVID or whatever it may be. And now it's the opposite end of the scale. People are being arrested because they're not conservative enough. They're not, they're not far right enough. And so this kind of culture issues swing all the time, but what doesn't swing is sanctions. And I think that is the most prevalent issue that occurred, and that's not because of the rulership of Iran. And by the way, I'm not Shia, I'm a Sunni, but I just see it from a geopolitical perspective, and I see what the Western societies and Israel has done to that country. And I would say they are largely, if not completely obviously, but largely overwhelmingly responsible for what's occurred in that country.
So I'm going to take issue with one thing you said, and then agree with most of the rest you said.
All right.
The reforms that have taken place in Iran are not official. The Iranian government has sort of allowed this to happen, and it's because of women life freedom. The women dressing less modestly now is just because they basically had a rebellion, and the state is nervous about having another one. So women are still expected to cover, and if women don't cover, there's still hell to catch. It's just women have been defiant and doing it anyway. They've been less modest, less well covered. It's not because the government has reformed or changed itself. I do agree that the sanctions have had a negative effect on Iran. I mean, that's the goal. I don't think it was because the Israelis and the United States want Iran to have a rebellion. I think it's because the United States and Israel want a boogeyman, somebody to point to and go, oh my God, look at that horrible evil. And it's large measure because of the way Israel is constructed. If peace broke out in the Middle East, Israel would be screwed. It wouldn't be able to function. It functions because it's a war society. It's an army without a country that stole a country. And the only way it operates is by keeping Europe and the United States in a state of perpetual fear that their white settler colonial project in the Middle East will collapse. And they're in fear for multiple reasons. One, the United States loves Israel because Israel creates so much chaos. At the drop of a hat, Israel's bombing Lebanon. At the drop of a hat, Israel's bombing Syria. At the drop of a hat, Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinian people. And that chaos helps keep the Arab world, the Middle East in general, in a state of disharmony. The Israelis do a fantastic job of pitting Arab states against Arab states. It's a brilliant tool if your goal is to keep this, the Arab population and from working with each other, let alone working with Turks and Persians. Having said that, the way the Israelis then kind of sell their position to Germany and Great Britain and the United States is, if you don't send us weapons, if you don't send us money, we'll collapse and we'll be in trouble and we won't be able to continue going on. There's another thing that I think people kind of miss. Zionism and anti-Semitism go hand in hand. So if you say that you're an anti-Zionist, you'll immediately be told you're anti-Semitic. It's not true necessarily, right? I mean, I'm sure there must be some anti-Zionists who are anti-Semitic, but most of the Zionists in Europe and the United States are in fact themselves anti-Semitic. They don't want Jews living in Europe and the United States. As long as there's an Israel, then at least a huge portion of the Jewish population is living there. And so that's another reason for it. Another reason why Europe is so keen to support Israel, and the United States isn't interested in this, but Europe is because of how Germany and Austria have framed their existence post-World War II. Yeah. Germany and Austria are so riddled with guilt about what they did. And for the record, I'm part German. I'm riddled with guilt, even though my ancestors left Germany. Well, they left Austria-Hungary in 1904. So, I don't have direct lineage that was involved in the Holocaust, but it doesn't matter. You still carry the guilt. They're so riddled with guilt for what they did, they believe the only way to make it okay is to let the Israelis do whatever they want. And so in their mind, 2 Holocausts makes a right. Allow the Israelis to commit this genocide against brown people, and then that makes it okay for the genocide that white people did to them. And of course, that's absurd and that's obscene, and that makes me ashamed twice. I'm ashamed of what Germany did in World War II, and I'm ashamed of what Germany is doing now. But such is life, right? What are you going to do? So I think for Israel, if there was a moment where the Islamic Republic made reforms and moved away from its current position, even if it stayed intact, just modified and seemed a little bit more reasonable, it would be a disaster for Israel, because then Israel can't keep pointing and going, oh my God, look, we're under threat, because the Arab states have all surrendered.
Yeah, look, I don't think that you should feel guilty for a man is not responsible for the actions of his father or grandfather or his lineage, but a man is responsible for his own actions. But just in terms of what you mentioned about women's life and freedom, well, those protests occurred couple of years ago, a few years ago, many years ago, and you didn't have any kind of change. The change occurred recently, and you're actually quite right. It's mainly because of economic issues, and maybe they did think that, look, the economic issues, the protests that happen because of economy, because Mossad and the CIA are trying to cause a rebellion in our country, cause a destruction and make it into Syria, maybe we should become a bit more lenient and liberal on this issue, because they will try and instigate this into another agenda and cause a destruction in our country, causing millions to die over this notion of women's life and freedom, when the same women will be murdered. For example, those 170 children who were murdered based on a bombing that occurred on a school based on a double tap. So that's probably or likely the reasoning why they did become lenient. It was probably strategic, but it wasn't based on any marches that occurred, but it was based on the economic issues that were forcing the issue to become a lot worse. This is what the protests were. If you look at the protests in January, the very first day, the protests were very legitimate. People were concerned about the economic issues in Iran. There were many people who were pro-government who were part of those protests. And then those protests were commandeered by the CIA, by Mossad, as confirmed by Huckabee. Scott Bessent admitted that they destroyed the Iranian currency for the same reason. They caused this destruction intentionally, and it was based on economic issues. And look, you mentioned about like colonization, and I do think that this is a form of mental colonization where people in the West believe that their Western liberal ideals are better than the ideals of the other, of the, as you mentioned, brown man or the Iranian man, where they need to be colonized with their specific ideology. And I see no evidence that this ideology is any better than their ideology. I see this ideology with extreme amounts of suicides. I see this ideology with a large number of pornography, OnlyFans, the destruction of the family. A child doesn't even have a father. You have a population collapse. And what is a population but the continuation of their lineage? If your entire lineage is no longer existing, if you're in a ticking population time bomb in terms of a population, then what are you but ceasing to exist? So I don't see any kind of proof that this ideology is better than their ideology. Okay, you want women to dress a bit more dress a bit more liberally, whatever your position may be on that, but that's your position, that's your Western ideals, and you're trying to colonize these people based on these ideals. And then based on that colonization, you want to cause a color revolution in that country. You want to cause a destruction I don't mean you, by them, so generally, but you want to cause a destruction in this country. You want to cause civil war, unrest. What we're seeing now, people are dying. And this is based on this whole notion of women's lives, freedom. I just find it to be an example of colonization. And so I see it as those who complain about colonization, but they want to colonize let's say the Muslim world, whichever it may be, whichever world it is, based on the liberal ideals. I think that is a problem. And even though I am very religious, I don't agree with some of the extremely conservative views in Islam. That being said, I understand that politics is complex and religion is complex, and I don't agree with this notion that this Western way, or the liberalist way, which actually wasn't in Western before, but this liberalist way is much more better. Actually, we see the problems with it. It's a complete collapse and destruction of society. And so when I look at the Iranian people, all I say is that they should be allowed to run their own country whichever way they want. They should be allowed to control the country whichever the way they want. And the people themselves in the country, if they disagree with it, they're able to speak out in the way they want. You look at the education in Iran, women are extremely educated. They're one of the most highly educated women throughout the world. You look, and so I do think that when you look at these, and I don't even think that's, again, this is even me saying that is almost like a Western framing of me trying, and because I am Western educated, but it's a Western framing of an idea. So I think that like this whole colonization thing, I always find that people in the left always talk about colonization, but then they do want to colonize, but based on the psychology of the mind.
So one of the things that you're doing is you keep referring to the uprisings like Women, Life, Freedom as if it was like a Mossad or CIA operation, which takes away the agency that the Iranian people have. So I've been to Iran. I know Iranians. I have a little bit of inside information. And if you look at what happened with Mahsa Amini, the woman that was murdered that triggered Women, Life, Freedom, the reason she was murdered, the reason she was beaten to death was because her hijab was showing too much hair. And that is actually exactly how the Islamic Republic operates. It is a corrupt and oppressive regime. It does not allow for people to have a real say in their government since Khatami. I mean, it has gone down this path of tyranny. And at the end of the day, the reason why the Iranian people keep having uprisings one after the other isn't because of the Mossad or the CIA. Now, the Mossad and the CIA definitely are playing a nasty role in Iran, assassinating scientists, or what Trump did in January, which was go out into the streets, topple your government, the United States will back you. And then the Iranian people ramped things up and went from protest into revolt. And the United States did nothing and watched them get slaughtered. I mean, that type of shenanigan, that type of misbehavior on the part of the United States is normal, right? That's exactly what we did in Iraq after the first genocidal war against the Iraqi people. The President George Bush Sr. got up in front of the world and told the Shia and the Kurds, rise up, and the United States will support you. They rose up, and then we watched them get slaughtered. So at the end of the day, there's clearly a playbook that we keep using with people in the Middle East, where we have a goal, but the goal isn't the stated goal. The stated goal is, regime change because we want to liberalize Iran. The United States doesn't care about that. The United States doesn't care what kind of rights women in Iran have. The United States only cares about controlling oil flow and empire. And at the end of the day, the United States doesn't need to impose any Western values on Iran because it doesn't care. As far as it's concerned, brown people and black people are subhuman. And the only reason that you use them is because they're cheap labor and you want to steal their resources. And right, it's just empire. It's just the old 19th century colonial empire attitude just taken into the 21st century and modernized slightly. At the end of the day, the Iranian people are a rebellious people who have gone through hell and have come back from it multiple times. They're resilient, they're powerful, and they have their own agency, and they're brilliant people. And I have no doubt that at some point they're going to get out from underneath the three nasty theocracies that are currently right now blowing the place up. It's just a matter of when, and it might be decades from now, but they will eventually prevail. The majority of Iranians are done with this government. They don't want anything to do with it, but they're stuck with it. What I'll tell you what's going to happen now, because war is a stupid solution. If war brought Western liberal ideas to the world, I think we should bomb Chicago. I think we should bomb Texas. Wouldn't that, right? We could straighten Texas and Chicago out tomorrow. Just all we need to do is bomb the place and send in the Marine Corps. The reason why... The reason that the fact that Americans believe that somehow bombing a place will make it a better place, like what we did in Iraq or what we did in Afghanistan, is beyond ludicrous. What we're doing right now in Iran is we're taking people who were in opposition to the Iranian government, and by blowing the place up, slowly pushing them to supporting the Iranian government the same way that we did in World War II. What we thought in World War II, a bunch of people thought in World War II, was that air power was enough to win a war. All you had to do was bomb the living hell out of a place, and then it would turn against its government because it would get sick of being bombed, and then it would look for a way to push for peace. So the Germans tried it with the London Blitz, and then we did it with the British as we bombed, every country in Europe, occupied countries, and Germany and Austria. We didn't care. We were just bombing everything. The end, what we discovered was that when you bomb a population, if it had qualms with its government, those qualms go away. True. 1/3 of the German population was actively resisting the Nazis right up until 1942. So for 9 years, 1/3 of the German public was in a state of economic and political resistance against the Nazis. By 1943, that population, I don't know what it shrank to because I've never seen any stats on it, but it was probably no more than 5%. And it's because once you bomb a city and you blow up the school and you blow up the police station and you blow up the bakery and you blow up the arena, people are thinking, A, I'm being killed here. Maybe I do need to resist. Maybe I do need to work with the state against this. And B, their jobs are gone. Their civilian life is gone. They might as well at that point then work with the state by making bombs or making bullets or doing whatever it is that the state needs them to do in that moment. So if you look at weapon manufacturing in German cities before the bombing, right? They're going along. The bombing hits, weapon manufacturing dips, and then it takes off and ends up much higher than it started off with because you've effectively rallied the people. And the fact that the United States can't figure this out because the United States refuses to read history is just baffling. If you really wanted to get rid of the Islamic Republic, you would drop the sanctions and begin trading with them. Because what we know from history is once people are rich, once people have an education, they can't wait to secularize and stop making babies. And right, that's the great lesson of the modern age is that educated rich people they're just not interested in those things. And so at the end of the day, it's either Americans are stupid and they don't know anything about history and politics, which is probably true, or they have a nefarious goal with Iran, which is also probably true. And so I think we've entered into a situation now where the US attacked because Israel really wanted to, and there's no plan and there's no exit strategy. And now Iran's actually in the driver's seat, because as long as there's no way to effectively bring down the Islamic Republic, then Iran has nothing to lose, because if Iran quit the war tomorrow, they know they'll be bombed in 8 months. So there's no point in quitting the war.
Yeah, look, I agree with you in terms of there's no doubt about it. You bomb the country see an external invading force bombing them, you will form a unity amongst the people. And this is what you saw. You saw it during the 12-day war, and you saw it again. People are united. Yes. Even those who politically disagree with the government are united with the government. That being said, there is a couple of things that I obviously do disagree with. The first thing is the first one is about the women's life and freedom. So if you look at what happened with Masafi, I know the Western position is that she was killed because of her hijab. Obviously, I disagree with that. The evidence from and by the way, I know a large number of people within the country. I'm very much connected within the country as well. I have sources within the country, both who are pro-government and also not supportive of the government. And so my kind of perspective on this isn't just some Western propaganda based on wanting regime change or wanting to support the government, however you want to look at it. But so in terms of her, that's how she was killed. But in terms of separate to that, it's not accurate to state that these protests occurred naturally and that they were just basically random. What we know is from the 12-day war and even this war, there was Mossad operations, there was CIA operations on the ground in Iran. They, as you said, they killed nuclear scientists, they bombed certain areas, they bombed certain places. They were integrated within the country. Some of these networks, according to intelligence, CIA intelligence themselves, said that they were produced over 10 to 15 years. So these weren't just some random people turning up to Iran to do so. And so those same networks during this protest in January. It wasn't that people were randomly protesting and then the government said they're gonna, guess what, America promised that they were gonna save them, and then this thing occurred. No, none of those things happened. What happened in reality was the very first day there was legitimate protests. You're allowed to protest in Iran, unlike most other countries, but anyway, that's this oppressive government is somehow letting you protest, unlike any of these other countries, unlike even the United States of America. I believe there was a couple of people murdered in the US for disagreeing with ICE, but anyway, we'll come back to Iran. What we've got is people were legitimately protesting because of economic sanctions and because of the economic situation in Iran, which isn't great. And then what happened was, quite clearly, and this has been demonstrated by two key pieces of evidence, and normally they don't tell you this. So people like us would be sounding like propagandists or conspiracy theorists, but Mike Huckabee quite clearly stated that they've got Mossad agents on the ground, basically within the area. In addition to that, Elon Musk sent Starlink into the country. Why did he send it? But the reason he sent it is because he wanted communication to occur. He wanted this color revolution to spread, as per what they did in throughout the Arab region during the Arab Spring. And then in addition to that, Scott Bessent admittedly let out that we intentionally collapsed the Iranian currency in order to cause a color revolution. So they did all of these things. You had collaborators and people from outside the country collaborators from different groups or different ideas, people who had been paid by the United States of America, because it's very easy to do so, because Iran is a very ethnically diverse, racially diverse, religiously diverse country. And so what you had is those people tried to cause a rebellion in the country. And so they burnt mosques, they burnt Islamic seminaries, they burnt buildings, they killed people. And the number of people they killed is just completely ridiculous, coming out with 30,000, 32,000. This is why no one believes anything they say. This is just propaganda. They want us to believe that 70,000 people were killed in Gaza, but 32,000 people were killed in 2 days in Iran, which is completely ridiculous. There was people who were killed for sure. The Iranian government says 3,117. I believe a human rights organization said about 7,000. Iran has given the names of those people. And now what the Western government needs to do is, and I said this, if they can produce the name of like 1,000 more people, it will demonstrate that the Iranian government is lying. And there are actually a lot more people who've died compared to what their claims are. It should be easy to furnish. But obviously they're not being able to furnish it. That does raise a number of questions. And the reason they're not able to is because it's just not true. These numbers they've created is fabricated in order to do two things: to dramatize the situation and to minimize what happened in Gaza. And in reality, they caused this color revolution. They hoped that this would cause a color revolution in the manner they did, but they failed, because Iran learned from the mistakes of Syria. They clamped down hard. They took off the internet, the Starlink, with the help of the Russians, and they weren't able to communicate through the Starlinks, through signal groups. And because of that, they weren't able to cause a color revolution. And so once that color revolution stopped, then the question mark become, actually, if Iran was an oppressive, suppressive government, why did they then allow protests to occur again weeks after that? If I was in charge, I think I'm quite a lenient person, but actually, if I was in charge and I knew that Mossad was operating in the country and they were trying to cause a color revolution in my country, which, let's be clear, could cause the deaths of millions. If we look at Syria, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, were killed. Millions upon millions were displaced. If a color revolution could cause that, being harsh for a short period of time, not allowing protest, actually would probably be the right move to make. But they were so lenient that they allowed these protests to continue. Even before this attack by the United States of America, 2 days before that, there was protests by university students in Iran, led by university students and the professors of those universities, one of whom, for example, Professor Morandi, people from his own university were protesting in those protests. And they were doing it economically because of economic issues. And that's literally the overarching issue. If you look at the protests, what happened recently, they were all economic and they were all taken control over by the Western nation. But where they failed was what you said quite accurately. Where they failed was that once they bombed Iran, any kind of negativity they had towards the government, and it's normal to disagree with the government, this notion that, for example, in these countries, you're not allowed to disagree with the government and somehow now you want a color revolution is ridiculous. In my own country, Keir Starmer has a popularity rating of in the single digits. In the United States of America, likely Trump's rating, because obviously polling is always manipulated, I would guess is about 30-40% at the moment. Generally speaking, there's hardly a leader where you have the overarching number of people who support it. It's human nature to kind of disagree with those in power to kind of disagree and not be happy with the way they implement in the country. And so this entire notion that's occurred has occurred based on Western propaganda. And it isn't based on some women's rights, it's based on economic issues. And the last thing you mentioned, which I do agree with, in terms of what's happened, there is no plan. There is no initiative on what to do. They're now haphazardly just bombing civilian structures. You mentioned a sports complex that was hit, a school. I believe 5 or 6 schools have been hit. I believe about 15 to 20 medical centers have been hit. The reason I say 50 to 20 is because I checked it only a few days ago. I'm assuming it's increased since then. What you're seeing is, if anything, what the Iranian people have done is they've completely coalesced together against this invader. And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on it. But do respond. And I do want to hear your thoughts specifically about American plans, because there is plans for a ground invasion, possibly into Karaj Island, possibly a major, large military invasion. And what's your thoughts on American successes in the past in terms of, or possible non-successes in the past in terms of attempted to do military invasions?
So first, I have to say this. There's this conspiracy that always forms on the right whenever there's a protest in the United States, a leftist protest, which is that George Soros funded it. It would have never happened without George. I'm going to text him right now to get my check because I have yet to receive any money from him. And what was it? How much? How much am I getting? Is it 7? That's all? Anyway.
No, that's the meme. Have you not heard the meme? It's the meme
more than that.
It's the Israelis pay people $7,000 for a post. It was a kind of like a joke.
Oh yeah, if you put a post saying nice things about Netanyahu, right? Yeah, that I totally believe is real. No, I mean like protests. Yeah. I think this notion that somehow the Mossad and CIA are manipulating the Iranian people on a large scale to create these kinds of protests is absurd. The Iranian people are too strong-willed and too independent to allow something like that to happen. Having said that, I don't think the Islamic Republic has a choice on the protests. It's legal because there's no way they can contain the Iranian people. The Iranian people are lions. They cannot be crushed. And you know, like they went through the Mongol invasions. One study, it's probably exaggeration, but it's interesting because the study that's more moderate isn't any better. One study suggests that the Mongols wiped out 90% of the population of the Khwarezmian Empire. The more accepted version is it's 75% of the Khwarezmian Empire. So somewhere between 75 and 90% of the Persian population was wiped out. Like, talk about genocide. And they survived and they carried on, and they're here today, and they're not going to ever be crushed by an Islamic Republic, by the United States or in Israel or anybody else for that matter, just because they're such proud, strong-willed people. Having said that, you asked an important question, which was U.S. invasion of Kharg Island. So when the Iran-Iraq War happened, which by the way was encouraged by the United States gave Iraq bad intelligence and convinced Saddam Hussein that the Iranian military was in shambles and that he could capture Khuzestan, which is the Arab majority area in the southwest, which also happens to be where the oil is. So when the Iran-Iraq War happened, the goal of the Iraqis was to capture the city of Abadan, which in Arabic, by the way, Abadan means never. So it was kind of like a terrible name. You're going to try and capture never. But I don't think you'll get it. The Iraqis never got it. They did get Khorramshahr to the north, and they swung out to the east of Abadan, and they were going to try and swing around and encircle the city. But by the time they got several kilometers, I want to say it was 100 kilometers, it might have been more, east of Abadan, the Iranian military stopped them and they couldn't advance any further. I actually got a battlefield tour of the Iran-Iraq War by a person who had been in the Iranian military. And, you know, he took me through Khuzestan driving, you know, this is the maximum extent of Iraqi infantry. This is the maximum extent of Iraqi armor. The reason all this matters is Abadan had the largest oil refinery on the planet. And the Iraqis were actually firing mortar rounds into it until they destroyed it. So what the Iranians did was they built a new facility on Kharg Island with the goal of getting it away from the mainland so that it would be impossible. The Iranian Navy had sunk the Iraqi Navy. So it would be impossible for the Iraqis to get to it going forward. It would be a safe place. Also, Khark Island has this really amazing coastline. It drops and gets really deep, so you can bring these huge oil tankers up really close, and then they have piers that go from the island, so you can just put the oil on the ships. Iran doesn't have a lot of great ports, right? Its best port is Bandar Abbas. It's not a very good port. So this Khark Island was a solution to many problems. The United States has suggested it will take Khark Island over. It's already bombed the island. It claims it hasn't hit any of the oil infrastructure. It was just bombing military targets on the island. If the United States takes it, because the United States is air power and naval power, there's nothing the Iranians can do. There's no way they would be able to get back onto the island and drive the United States off. It would just be easy pickings. It would be like when the United States invaded Grenada. Like, okay, you captured an island. Good for you. The problem is Iran has said that if that happens, they will target all of the oil infrastructure in the region. And they already are hitting oil infrastructure. Just yesterday, they hit the Fujairah oils. There's these oil tanks there, and they hit the airport, the Dubai airport. So at the end of the day, they've said if the United States does this, they're going to go all out. So I'm in the UAE right now. We get, I think it's the number is around 200 drones and missiles a day. In fact, while we were, I don't know if this mic picked it up, but while you were talking to me, explosions were going off in the background, and you could also hear fighter jets. I hope you guys got it because it's fun drama.
Well, we appreciate when that happened to the UAE, but anyway, do continue.
Yeah, this constantly bashing on the UAE has really been hilarious to me. I think the Zionists have done a fantastic job of portraying the UAE as this pariah state in the minds of everybody. And I'm just surprised that people get duped by this. Anyway, as the bombs are going off, the UAE and the French Air Forces helping the UAE have blocked about 95%. The thing is Iran doesn't have to fire 200 a day. Iran could fire a lot more. Iran has a massive stockpile. They're firing 200 a day because it's a symbolic gesture. They're hurting us. There's no two ways about it. 8 people have died so far. I don't know. Tens of people have been injured. There's no doubt they're hurting the economy. There's no doubt that they're creating chaos. You know, a bunch of white people fled. Americans and Europeans couldn't wait to get out of here. So the reality is that real damage is being done, but it's Iran with one hand tied behind its back. In fact, probably a leg tied behind its back. If the United States invades Khark Island, it will be a disaster for the region. And I think everybody knows that, including the United States, which is why it's very likely it will happen, because the United States does not have good intentions for the GCC states. And I think one of the things that the GCC is finally starting to wake up to is the reality that the United States is not an ally, that the GCC has been paying the United States billions of dollars a year to have military bases to protect it. And look what that's gotten them. Qatar got bombed twice last year, once by Iran and once by Israel. You know you're screwed when Israel and Iran are both bombing you. Iraq right now is being bombed by the United States and Iran. The Iraqis must be like, what is this? Why? The two countries we've had to go to war with are bombing us again. And here we go again. Like, what is, and the tragedy is Iraq is basically an Iranian ally at this point. Qatar has great relations with Iran, and it's occasionally getting hit by Iran. Oman has great relations with Iran, and Iran has hit Oman. We are in an age of the U.S. empire is falling apart, and in its falling apart, it is thrashing about and causing all sorts of misery and suffering. And it's in this reactionary pendulum swing to the extreme far right. Just yesterday, I was on Piers Morgan, and I pointed out that fascists in Europe are to the left of American conservatives. And that's how far this trajectory has taken us. We are in serious trouble, not just because 30% of the world's fertilizer comes from the Persian Gulf and 20% of the world's oil comes from the Persian Gulf, but because at the end of the day, it's unclear to me how the United States ends this thing and ends up in a position where it's made the world safer and better. Right. At the end of the day, I think if I were a GCC leader, I would be talking to the Chinese about replacing U.S. bases with Chinese bases. I would definitely be rethinking my alliance to the United States. And you know, if you're European, right now you're thinking, how do I replace the oil? Maybe we need to trade with the Russians, which is a disaster for Ukraine at that point. If you're Chinese, you have to be thinking, oh my God, if the United States actually invades Iran, we can create another Vietnam, another Iraq, another Afghanistan for the United States to lose in. Iran is 3 times bigger than Iraq. We crippled Iraq with 12 years of brutal sanctions where we cut off their food and their medicine, literally starving them to death. They lost 100,000 people a year to what has to be the most cruel, sadistic sanctions in human history. Nobody's ever done anything like this before. And then we invaded the country, which is a flat country, and we still couldn't win. We still got our asses handed to us. In 8 years, we were forced to leave with our tails between our legs. And then we had to reinvade the country because we created a monster. We created ISIL, and ISIL captured half of Iraq overnight. And we had to go back in there and rescue the puppet state we had put in place, which then quickly became an Iranian ally because they realized the United States is not a good ally. And you're right, like, this is the history of U.S. foreign policy. It's one catastrophic, stupid mistake after the other that just makes the world worse off than it was before. And I don't know how to solve it. One of the problems is people like Keir Starmer and Merz and Macron, instead of being angry at Trump and going, dude, you're on your own, good luck. You shouldn't have tried to take Greenland from Denmark. The United States has become a rogue state, especially under you. They went running over and started licking his boots. And they were like, oh my God, whatever we can do to restore things to our old friendship, as if that's possible with a narcissistic sociopath. What the world needs to do is stand up to Trump, and the world needs to say, enough is enough, but instead it's a bunch of Neville Chamberlains trying to appease him. And that's the real danger here, is that not only do we not know how this ends, but also what happens on the other side of this. Is he gonna do Cuba next? You know what I mean? Like, is he gonna attack Canada next? is he gonna go after Denmark after all? Like, he's gone off the rails, and he's taken the world with him.
I mean, look, I don't think that the Gulf states will change their position, because they are very much, their mind is colonized, and they have this kind of subservient attitude towards the United States of America, where they almost worship them. And so you see that with the importation of the ideas, the ideals. You look at, for example, the UAE and the manner that it's acted, the way it treats its underclass in the country, the way it acts in Sudan, the way it acted in Yemen, the way it basically works with the Israeli state in a wide range of things, including not just trade agreements, but even if you look at some of the technology that was used in Gaza, they'd financed it. And so if you look at the UAE's collaboration with Israel, it's been significant. And actually, that's probably the large reason why people have been celebrating. But I don't see these states, whether it's UAE, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Saudi Arabia, changing their perspective. Especially Saudi Arabia, they've been in bed with the United States of America and Israel for a very long time, and including a wide range of ways. And so I don't see that changing. Maybe it could, and this is going to be a kind of important arc to see whether they do change their perspective, whether they do change their direction, or they continue to do what they do. I kind of think that they won't, but I know there's a lot of people who do think that they have the same opinion as you, that they've realized that they're not going to be protected. They realize that Israel's been chosen over them, and they're going to change their way. I think they know the former, and I don't think they will, but I know most people do agree with you on that. They do think that the Gulf states are going to change their opinion and maybe redirect their attention. So I can see where you're coming from. But Dr. Roy, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you're right, that there is a history in the past, especially, of collaborating, even if it's indirectly. Like, if you go back to the 1960s, when Egypt was in the Yemen, it was invited by the government of North Yemen to help it put down a monarchist uprising. And it was a socialist republic of Yemen that, by the way, joined the United Arab States, which was was meant to be a confederacy. It never happened, but it's why Yemen has its flag. And what happened was the U.S., Great Britain, Israel, and Saudi Arabia backed the monarchists, and then Egypt and in the end, the 6-Day War took Egypt out. The Egyptian army had to leave within a year after the 6-Day War, but in the end, the Socialist Republic in North Yemen succeeded. It defeated Israel, the United States, Great Britain, and Saudi Arabia. So there's this history, this deep history of the Saudis hating Israel and pushing back against it, but feeling like they're stuck in an alliance that they made in January 1945 with the United States, and that there's no way for them to get out from underneath it. And that's been the fear that the entire GCC has had. You know, like if you don't work with the United States, how do you protect your sovereignty against Iran and Iraq? How do you make sure that if you're a small GCC state, how do you protect your sovereignty against Saudi Arabia? Like, what if Saudi Arabia decides to recreate the first Saudi state, which was significantly larger than this third Saudi state is? So they've made this pact with the devil, and I think a lot of them are starting to reconsider the pact with the devil. I know you're skeptical, and one of the reasons to be skeptical is because what are their options? I mean, I keep hearing people say, why don't the Arabs do something about the genocide in Palestine? What are the Arab states supposed to do about the genocide in Palestine? In 1973, in 2 days, the Egyptian military defeated the Israeli military. It was over. The Egyptians had won the war. The United States replaced all of Israel's tanks basically overnight and put Israel back into the fight. And Israel punched a hole through the Egyptian lines, crossed the Suez Canal, and were on their way to Cairo. The only reason they didn't get to Cairo was because the Soviet Union said, if the Israeli soldiers get 100 kilometers west of the Suez Canal, we're paradropping in and we're going to stop them. And the United States abandoned Israel and said, you're on your own, right? Sadat got up and he made a speech and he said, we proved we can defeat Israel. We did it, but nobody can defeat the United States. And I think in that moment in 1973, the United States made it clear to the Arab world that there is no military solution to the Palestine-Israel conflict. So then at that point, what are you supposed to do? And I don't know what the answer is. I know this, that it is clear the Abraham Accords are dead, 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 dead. And it's so dead that Israel tried to screw up the UAE. I think it was a week ago. The U.S. attacked an Iranian desalination plant, and then Israel immediately put it out that it was the UAE that attacked the desalination plant. And of course, UAE is like, no, we didn't. We're not attacking Iran. We're not escalating. Because, right, what does Israel want? It wants Iran to attack the GCC states' desalination plants, because Israel's only goal is the genocide of the Arab people. The only reason they'll leave any Arabs alive is they want cheap labor. And right, because that's what they've done with the settler colonial project in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, is they turned the Palestinian population into an underclass working population that, you know, gets stuck building walls to wall themselves in, like ghettos, like Germany did to the Jewish population in the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland. Which is, you know, the irony of ironies, that's where we are. But that's where we are because, right, two Holocausts makes a right. And that's the philosophy, that the prevailing philosophy. If the world really wanted peace, what it would do is it would cut off military and economic aid to Israel and force Israel to the negotiation tables, because Israel has no incentive to ever negotiate because its entire system is based on perpetual war. Unfortunately, the U.S. isn't much different. And so that's one of the reasons why they get along so well. They're both white settler colonial projects where they both stole another person's country and they stole a bunch of other people's resources and labor. And their goal is to perpetuate permanent warfare. And Europe needs to stand up to them and stop that. And Europe doesn't have the spinal column to do it, which is disappointing. I mean, not all of Europe, obviously. Ireland, Spain, Slovenia, Norway. There are European states that have a good, strong calcium diet, but the rest of Europe is just a bunch of bootlickers.
Yeah, look, I think I'll agree largely with what you said. I do think that the Arab nations, in addition to what you said, so I agree with that, is they're afraid of regime change from the Americans as per what happened in the past, and they know that they're so embedded with the CIA, with America, that their guard, their family member can quite easily take them out and replace them. And I think that's another fear point that they have. And yeah, I do believe you. I agree with you in terms of Israel, but I do believe it's based on like Jewish supremacy as opposed to anything else. But I think largely we agree on that. But Dr. Roy, I think next time we need to book in a longer time because I didn't expect us to disagree so much. Someone was like, get this guy on. I thought it's going to be, I normally do quick 30-minute interviews on Iran. I didn't expect us to disagree so much. I hope I've been as respectful as I could. Normally, I'm not as respectful.
Absolutely. I don't care if you're disrespectful. Let's do it. Let's roll up here. I'll roll up my sleeves now for next time.
No, I appreciate you taking your time. Where can people find you, Dr. Roy?
I mean, I'm on YouTube, so if you just do my name, Dr. Roy Casagranda, you'll find me on YouTube. I hate social media so much, but I also sometimes drop like shorts on Instagram, and TikTok is punishing the hell out of me because of my position on Palestine. Yeah, like a few days ago, we were looking and I had an Instagram video that had gone to 2.2 million, and it was 3,000 on TikTok. So I've given up on TikTok.
They've definitely be boosting pro-Palestine, although your Iran position will probably get you boosted. But anyway, Dr. Roy, thank you so much.
My Iran position is that everybody is evil. There are 3 theocracies. I want all 3 of them to go down.
Well, they want the Iran one down. But anyway, Larry Ellison definitely wants the Iran one down. But anyway, thank you so much for taking your time out to join us.
Guys, I want to debate him someday.
Who?
Larry Ellison.
Well, yeah, I would love to debate him as well, because I disagree with him about everything. But anyway,
everything.
Sorry?
It's 100%.
Yeah. For you, it's 50 because you're with him on Iran. You see, that's the problem.
I mean, I hate all evil. I don't care where the evil is. Like all those leftists who love Putin, but then, they're like, arguing that we should stop genocide in Palestine. I know, I hate Putin and I hate the genocide in Palestine. I don't understand. This thing that people need to have a good guy and a bad guy. The world is filled with bad guys. Who's a good guy in the world? Ireland. Like, you can count them. There's maybe 15 countries on the planet that aren't ruled by a jackass. And I don't understand this need to have good guys in a world that's just overrun by evil bastards.
So I'll tell you what it is, and I do think it's almost like good v evil. Not that Iran is the embodiment of good, but in reality, the way we see it is we've been in this fight a very long time against Zionism, and we've never thought that we could succeed. I thought it was very tough for Israel to ever be taken out. I was always thought that it was very difficult for Zionism to be taken out, and now that we see Iran absolutely hammering Israel, hammering the GCC countries, hitting the American military bases. In UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they've been so kind and so benevolent, as you said. They've not even hit the desalination plants in these countries, even though those countries, it was reported, have hit Dubai.
It's just Israeli propaganda. It's bullshit. They haven't done anything.
This is from Iran themselves. They said they've got the proof that there was a bombing from Ras Al Khaimah and from somewhere in Dubai.
Ras Al Khaimah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, look, we know the UAE is in bed with them. I know you disagree, but it is quite clear that the UAE is
there's
in bed
no
with
doubt the UAE is a U.S. ally. I mean, there's U.S. bases here. That the UAE would even attack Iran is preposterous because the UAE is horrified that Iran is going to go full throttle on the UAE.
Well, they're subservient to the United States of America. That's their problem. So they have to conform.
They don't have to.
Well, they don't have to, and then they'll lose out in other ways. Maybe MBZ, as per what we discussed, will be